There's more here. You have some more here, Jason. Some of these don't have the cover, so they'll have to slide the cover in. Sorry.
Some of you may have to do it yourself cover.
Yes. All right, everyone. It's time for us to begin our Bible class. We are studying the story of David and Goliath. A very popular, well-known story all over the world and in all religious circles. And I'm excited about being able to discuss this with you this morning. Before we do that, let's go ahead and bow for a word of prayer. God, we're so thankful that you love us. We're so thankful that your son never was separated from his identity. He knew who he was, and he knew who you are. And we're thankful for examples like David, who knew who he was and knew who you are. Help us to know who we are and to know who you are. As we study this incredible man who was complex, but yet a man that you have said was a man after your own heart. When he was anointed king, you said that. Before he was anointed king. And then after he died with all of his life and all of his sins and all of his mess-ups, you still compared other people to him and said, be more like David. Help us to have a heart that's like yours so that we can be servants that are loving of others and that love you and that will be dedicated to doing what you want us to do. Through Jesus we pray. Amen.
Wait, you got one more. Does anybody need to...
All right. There's a couple more up here too.
Oh, sorry. All right, you still have a couple more. Okay.
All right, so 1 Samuel 17 gives us the story of David and Goliath. And this story really starts out on two different scenarios. You have where David is. David is home with his father tending the flocks. That's one scene that we have in this story. The other scene in this story is on the battlefield where David's three oldest brothers, along with Saul and Jonathan and the entire army of Israel, have gathered together on two mountains on one side of this valley. The Philistines have gathered on one side, and the Israelites have gathered on the other side, and they're on these mountain ridges, and below is this valley. And every day they would line up in all of their battle array. So they would put their armor on. I mean, total armor. They'd put their breastplate on. They'd put the shin guards on. They would strap in their sword. And they would line up. And they would face each other. And they would start yelling at each other. It was called a battle cry. We're not told exactly what it was that they were saying. The only specific battle cry that we're giving in the Bible is when Gideon's battle happens, it says their battle cry, after they busted the pictures in the light shown, for the Lord and for Gideon, for the Lord and for Gideon. But just imagine these two armies lining up on day one, yelling back and forth. They could have been yelling words. They could have just been grunting. They could have just been making a bunch of noise. The purpose of that was to intimidate the other side. You know, we're going to kill you. We're going to destroy you. With all armor array, just yelling and screaming at each other. And then, after all the yelling and all the screaming was done, from one side, out stepped Goliath. Now, Goliath was 9.5 feet tall. And as he stood out, all the Israelites saw this huge man coming forward and leaving the rest of the Philistine army behind. And he starts this psychological warfare with them. And his attempt is to get them so afraid and so scared that they just put their swords down and agree to be the slaves of the Philistines. And so he starts to taunt them. Am I not a soldier from the Philistines, and aren't all you Israelites, and don't you serve Saul? Well, you need to choose one person. And if your champion can come out here and your champion can defeat me, you can just imagine the deep, gruff voice that he has and maybe the laughter, he could defeat me, then we will be your slaves. But if I defeat him, then all of you will drop down all of your weapons and will agree to be our slaves. This was such a powerful form of warfare. If you think about this for a second, if he wins at this, and he convinces all of the Israelites just to drop their swords and become the slaves of the Philistines, then none of the Philistines really are in jeopardy of losing their lives. No one's going to go back fatherless. Nobody back home is going to be fatherless. They're not going to be without a husband. This is a great strategy, getting them so afraid that we don't even have to fight. Now, that happened on day 1. Well, the same thing happened on day 2. They get in lines, they get all their armor on, they look at each other, and they start yelling, "We're going to destroy you! No, we're going to destroy you!" And then, after all the yelling was over, Goliath would step forward. And when he stepped forward, all the Israelites were like, "Oh, not that guy again. What's he going to say this time?" And he gives the chant. He gives his battle cry. "I defy Israel. One of you, just one of you, get some guts, get some courage, and come over and fight me. And if you win, we will be your slaves. But if I win, you will be our slaves." Day 3. They put all their armor on. They line up in lines, and they yell at each other. And then, after the yelling is over, Goliath steps forth, and he makes the same proclamation. Now, somewhere in all of this, Saul starts to realize how devastating this is on the morale of his people. So he starts offering certain prizes, certain rewards for the one who is willing to stand up and fight this behemoth of a man who keeps coming out and defying the armies of Israel. And maybe the first one was money. I'll give you a bunch of money. And that's pretty good ramification. A lot of people do a lot of things for money. And so, yeah, money might be it. And not only money, tax-free money. And then your father's house will never have to pay taxes. You know, you'd be the hero of the family, wouldn't you? If you arranged a situation where your family never had to pay taxes again, that'd be great. And maybe for those who were not married, he ends up offering, if you will do this, if any of you young bucks out there who want a wife and you've been looking for a wife, this is a good way to do it. Just go fight that giant and I'll give you my daughter. And it's not only a great thing to have a wife given to you, but now you're making an alliance. Your family is coming into an alliance with the king's family. Your sons and your daughters are going to be princes and princesses. This is a pretty significant deal. No takers. I can't help but imagine. I don't know what day it would have been. Day 5, I'm putting my armor on, and I'm getting up there, and I'm lining up in battle array, and I know what's coming next, and I start to yell, and my yell is like, "Oh, yeah, here we are." And maybe not quite as enthusiastic as I was yelling on day 1. And then day 21 comes, and I put on my armor, I get out here. Why are we even doing this? We all know no one's going to fight that guy. What are we up to? And they do it again, and oh, yeah, we might win, but we're probably not even going to fight, not even going to try. And the Philistines, man, they know they have the Israelites where they want them. If you have your opponent scared to death of you, oh my, your victory's almost assured if your opponent is scared of you. And then finally, we have day 40. And on day 40 is when these two worlds collide. See, Jesse decides to send David, his youngest son, to the battle lines where his 3 oldest sons are, to take them some cheese and some other items, and he gives them some things to take to the commander of the army. So when David gets there, he leaves the supplies with his supply men, he runs to see his brothers, and then in the midst of all this, the yelling and the screaming, and then here comes Goliath. And it seems to me that David's just catching the tail end of this. David's catching this giant come forward and yelling things, defying the armies of God. Now, David hasn't experienced this for all these days. David's life experience has been totally different. He's been tending the sheep. He's been writing Psalms. He's been having this great relationship with God, and he gets here. This is foreign to him. He can't even believe this is happening. He's looking at all these soldiers who are maybe half dressed now in their battle apparel, and they have no spirit left at all in them. he's looking at them like, what are you guys doing? You're the great army of Israel. You serve the living God. How is it that you allow this Philistine to stand out here and defy the armies of God and defy the God of Israel? I know who our God is. You should know who our God is. What's going on? And then he starts getting all these, whoever goes and fights that guy is going to get a lot of money. Whoever goes and fights that guy, he's not going to have to pay taxes. Whoever goes and fights that guy is going to get the king's daughter. And so he starts asking around, hey, is that really true? Tell me what the king said. And so he hears it again. And in the middle of all that, his brothers, especially his oldest brother, hears this. And he says, David, what are you doing here? Why have you even come here? I know that you have a bunch of pride. And I know the insolence of your heart. You've only come to see the battle. David's like, what? I didn't just come to see the battle. Dad sent me here. But while we're talking about it, why is this guy defying the armies of the living God? And David's boldness and the way that he's talking and the way that he just can't believe these soldiers are unwilling to go fight this giant, that gets to the king. And so Saul calls for David. David goes before Saul. And when he goes before Saul, Saul's like, what's the commotion? You know, what am I hearing? And I will go, and David's probably 15, 16 at the time, so his voice might not have changed totally, not deep like Goliath would have been. And he goes, I will go and fight him. And Saul's like, you can't go fight that guy. You're just a kid. And he has been a warrior since he was your age. He's been doing this for a long time, and your little eagerness and your pretend courage is nothing compared to this guy. But Saul's really left with no choice here. This is the only guy in 40 days who has stepped up and said, I will do it. And so he puts all Saul's armor on. Now remember, what do we know about Saul and his stature? Head and shoulders above everybody else. So David puts on all his armor. David's not head and shoulders above everybody else. When he was anointed king in chapter 16, what you guys talked about Wednesday, he was a good-looking guy, but there was nothing about his stature that would make him appealing to be king. As a matter of fact, Samuel, when he saw the oldest brother, who just accused David of having pride in his heart and being a rebellious kid, he was the one that was big and tall and strong. And so he starts walking around in this stuff. He goes, you just see David, fumbling around with this, and his stuff's too big and not able to make it. And he says, I can't do that with all this. He takes it all off. And he takes what he knows. He takes his sling. And he goes down to the brook, and he gets 5 smooth stones, and he goes out to face Goliath. And when Goliath sees David, he is insulted. He is so mad. He looks at him and says, what is this? You guys are sending a kid to fight a man, and he's coming to me with sticks like I'm some kind of a dog? And then he threatens David, I am going to give your flesh to the birds of the air. I am going to destroy you. I'm going to kill you. You're going to hate the day you ever stepped forward from the Israelites and fought against me. And David, with all the boldness that he could muster at his age, and based upon his experience, he already told Saul, I have experience. I've killed a lion. I've killed a bear because God was with me. And the same God that was with me when I killed the lion and I killed the bear is with me today. And so that uncircumcised Philistine is no match for me. And he tells the giant that. He just shouts over the valley and says, oh yeah, I am going to destroy you. I mean, now we're back to day one with the taunts back and forth, right? The taunts, the battle cries. You think you're going to kill me? No chance. I come to you not with sword, not with spear. I come to you in the name of the God of Israel, who's about to prove to everyone this day that the Lord's strength does not depend on weapons. The Lord's strength depends on nothing. He will help me defeat you. And he says, I am going to cut your head off. I mean, can you imagine that? Can you imagine how Goliath, every word David says, he's laughing at, just getting madder and madder and madder at what he's saying? And I'm not only going to feed your flesh to the birds of the air, all of you Philistines over there, you're going to be eaten by the birds of the air today. And so Goliath has had enough. He starts charging toward David. David starts charging toward Goliath, and David takes that sling, he puts a rock in it, and we know the rest of the story, round and round and round. hits David, hits Goliath, probably in the forehead, falls down. Now, we did this on that little 1 minute, we're not going to do it, but on that 3-minute story we did on one of those singing nights. Could you imagine the Israelites as David goes out there and they're like, oh no, we're going to get killed. We're going to get destroyed. There's no way. I hope whoever picks me to be their slave is nice. I mean, that's all I have right now. And the Philistines are just like, oh yeah, nobody can beat our giant. We are unbeatable. This is, we all, most of us follow some sport and are familiar with some sport. I mean, and what are games like this where you have an underdog compared to someone who's going to destroy him? They refer to this as the David and Goliath scenario, right? And if you're a team that has no chance, the fans might do that. We got spirit, yes we do. We got spirit, how about you? And they're yelling, we got spirit, yes we do. We got spirit, how about you? And about halftime, the team that's really up said, scoreboard, scoreboard. It's just a reminder, you have no chance of winning this battle. And yet David, after he hits Goliath, could you imagine the Philistines at this point? Our champion is dead. And they don't put their weapons down to be saved. They start running. And the Israelites now, hey, the giant is gone. They all grab their armor, put it on now. They get onto this battle of chasing them down. They have this huge victory on this particular occasion because one boy, one young man, had the courage to trust God above everything else. And with God's help, he defeated the giant of the other team who was taunting the God of Israel and the armies of Israel. So let's go ahead and dissect this a little bit and talk about this. But before we do that, for those of you who were not at the Bible storytelling workshop, the question number 1 might not make sense to you. So question number 1, and I had the wrong verses there. I had the right verses on the syllabus, and I sent that email out. We have a couple mic runners there, so that's good. When you're looking at story structure, the story of a structure has been studied for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And what people have determined is that the certain basic story of the structure of stories is the same across cultures and throughout the generations. And so it consists of just a few elements, and if you can get these elements down, then you can understand the stories better. That's why I think this is so important. First of all, there's some kind of a setting, and we've looked at this already. There was 2 settings in our story. David's setting at home tending his sheep, and there was the setting at the battlefront. So there's 2 settings on this particular occasion. And then you usually have what's called an inciting incident. Something happens that changes everything. It could be, for the one setting, the first time Goliath stepped out in front of all the Philistines, now that was different. Something has changed here. We're not as enthusiastic about this fight as we once were because of that giant. With David, the inciting incident is simply his father saying, go take this stuff to your brothers. And a lot of times inciting incidents in the moment don't seem that important. It's just something minor that happens, and it might not be even the intent of the person that is causing this to happen, that something big's going to happen today. Jesse didn't think he was sending David to save the nation. David didn't think he was leaving to take this cheese, and when I get there, I'm going to kill the opposing giant. I mean, I'm going to be the hero when I leave. It's just an inciting incident. Once that happens, then you have a rise in the action. You start having event after event after event after event. As the action rises, the tension begins to build greater and greater and greater until you get to the moment of the climax of the story. And in the climax of the story, I like to refer to it in the pictures that I have for this. I have someone riding a bike and jumping a ramp. When you jump a ramp, most of us in this class, we're still young enough that we jumped real ramps with real cinder blocks and plywood. And we would jump these ramps, and you never really knew exactly how this was going to end. So when the climax is happening, it's when you're up in the air, and it could go either way. I could land this pretty well, and I'll be the hero. Everybody, oh, yeah, he jumped over 3 people, or whatever the case may be. Hopefully nobody really tried that. Or it could be, oh, you crash, you just don't know. But once the climax happens and you land, then you start this falling action. All right, now with the climax, we know what happened. The climax happens, and so you have the action falls until you get some kind of a resolution. And the resolution to the story usually is a tragedy or it's a triumph, either victory or defeat. And when you get down there, when all the dust settles of this story, what do? That sort of then is the setting of the next story. So now we have the setting of the next story. So what did you guys have for, I already sort of noted the inciting incidents here. I think there are 2, and that's another thing about inciting incidents. There's not, and all of these things, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer all the time. It depends on the parameter of the story. We've picked one story out, and it depends on the people in the story, and inside the inciting incidents may be different. So I think there are 2. One, Jesse tells David to go take this stuff to his brothers. The other, Goliath steps out and makes his first taunt on day 1. I think those are the 2 incidents in this story that change everything. Anybody have something different on the inciting incident you'd like to discuss? This is question number 1. Before I do that, let me get the remote. Typically on this class, I don't use a lot of PowerPoint. Mostly what I use is pictures and maps. And so I do want to show you this. That's where the valley would have been, where they had this battle. It's close to Bethlehem, where David's city. It's close to Jerusalem. And here's what the valley looks like. It tells you from the west aerial view, so you sort of get an idea of this. There's mountain ranges on both sides. You can't really see the mountain range on the other side there, but then there's, that's just some wheat that is in the valley. It gives you another view. You can sort of see where the Philistines were there on the right side and the Israelites were there on our left side as they prepare for this battle. The brook flows through it, and this is dried up, with a picture of the brook when it's dried up, picture of the brook when it has water in it, and young people picking up stones from the brook there. And then this is what these are remains that are there, probably after the time of David, but it shows what the Israelite encampment could have looked like, these stone structures. It was more than just tents, that you might just picture just tents, but they did have some structure there, probably in order to defend themselves from their enemies. They put up the rocks and put up the places for the soldiers to stand, and it would have looked something like this. All right. Oops. There we go. We'll stick with that. I guess I never really blanked that out before. There we go. All right, so anything else? Any inciting incident? All right, Anna?
When Goliath came out and said that.
Yeah, when he started taunting them by day 1.
When he started talking about him, and saying that, if somebody kills me, then.
Yeah, because that changes everything. Before, they're just lining up for battle, and eventually they're going to have an all-out war. Goliath steps out. We're not going to have an all-out war. If you'll just agree, somebody will agree to fight me. So that is definitely an inciting incident. What about rising action? You have anything listed for that? How the action intensifies as you go? Okay. Yeah, that would be go ahead and say it again.
That's okay. When David goes to talk to Saul, when Saul brings him in, they're talking about.
Yeah, that's gonna be a rise in the action, correct? I mean, now we're getting a little more intense here. We have a candidate who's going to go in and fight this battle. Bonnie?
I said pretty much the same thing. He had been challenging them for 40 days, and then when David arrived, he found all this out, and he was incensed and told Saul he would fight him.
Yeah, very good. That is a rise in the action. All right, we have 2 more over here. Mike, did you have your hand up? All right, Mike has one.
Just a comment that after 40 days of this, and the conditions were whoever loses becomes slaves, that Saul gave in to David, and that had to be the hand of God. But he's placing all of his bets on this kid, and if he lost, they become slaves.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and you sort of picture that. Everybody who sees David coming out He's the one the king has chosen? We're doomed. They probably start visualizing their life as slaves at this particular point. We're going to lose this.
Just interesting, the stalemate between the two armies, that it seemed like they didn't want to fight. There was issues with confidence maybe, and so they do send out their champion, letting one person go to battle. So
Yeah, and you don't know what is in the minds of the Philistines because they've lost to the Israelites in Jonathan's lifetime. Remember that? If you go back a few stories, Jonathan caused this great victory over the Philistines. And so the Philistines might have some confidence, but their confidence has to be waning a little bit because the last time we met the Israelites, Jonathan went with his armor bearer and killed a whole bunch of people within an acre, and then God causes this thunder and this earth to shake, and there was a routing there. That's when Jonathan took the honey and all that, and there was all that took place. So it was very fascinating. And I think maybe for those 40 days you're at a stalemate. The action isn't really rising. It's just sort of stale until David gets on the scene and he goes in that tent and talks to Saul, and then Saul allows him to come in. Do you have something? All right. Yeah, we have two mic runners, so raise your hand if you have something you want to add to this.
Yeah, I think a little before that is maybe it's not an action, but where, David's thinking, and who is this guy? I think that's a rising action because you're getting the perspective from the protagonist to say, this is how we should be feeling. Everybody should be feeling this way. So I think within the story, though, that it's not a per se action, that he's thinking, why aren't we doing something about this? It's before the incident with going into Saul and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's all rising a little bit when David gets on the scene. It rises a little bit more when David goes in to talk to Saul. It rises a little bit more when David comes out of that tent and he starts heading that way. It rises a little bit more when they start their yelling back and forth, David and Goliath at each other. You're listening to all this. You still don't know how it's going to turn out. And then I think the climax is probably when they start running at each other. Now you know something's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen right now, but the big guy's running at the little guy, and the little guy's running at the big guy. Eventually, something's got to give. We are really close to coming to an end or the climax of the story. And the climax, I would say, probably when the stone hits Goliath in the forehead, and you see the dramatic representations that you see. Always have Goliath wobbling there for a few seconds, I've been hitting the forehead, what's going to happen? But when he, bam, falls to the ground, then we know how this is ended. And then the falling action is going to be when they all now have confidence, they all gear up, strap on their sword, they make sure their armor's ready, and they go running after the enemy. And then when they have total defeat of their enemy on that particular occasion, that would be the triumph that happens at the end. So it's just the structure that it's there. And what I want you to understand about this, story structure is God-made. God determined that. He created us to react in certain ways to the way stories are written. And then he writes the most amazing story ever. And then he fills this book that we have with a whole bunch of amazing stories. And so when you're reading this, think, and if you could even, when you're watching television or watching a movie or whatever, and you pick out the story structure, don't give the director a lot of credit for that. I hate to say this, but just say, you know what? They're just really learning from what God ordained and how we react to these things. And that's good that they were able to do that. All right, a couple of things as we continue on. 9.5 feet tall. That's huge. That's only 6 inches shorter than the basket. You imagine a 9.5-foot guy comes walking on the basketball court one day? You think you're going to win? Not a chance. You're just going to stand there and block all the shots and dunk every time. It says he wasn't just tall, he was a champion. He has been battle tested, and he has won time and time and time again. And he was a very, very powerful, good trash talker. And it really got into the hearts of all the people. We also read his armor, the coat that he wore, 150 pounds. Can you imagine wearing a coat of armor that weighed 150 pounds? and his spearhead weighed about 15 pounds, the head of his spear. Can you imagine having that hit you? I mean, you're not living if that gets a direct hit. You're gonna have a huge wound if something that powerful hits you. The javelin was meant as a throwing instrument. A spear was more used in hand-to-hand combat. And the other thing that I want you to realize and do as we go through all these stories, always look for emotion in the story and highlight emotion words. You can get you a red highlighter, and every time there is an emotion showed, that's going to tell you this is a significant moment. For instance, in verse 11, it says, when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were upset and very afraid. And when you're thinking about these stories, we know what upset looks like. Has anybody here been upset? Has anybody ever here been scared? We know what that looks like. We know what that feels like. But has anybody ever been scared to the point where you thought you were going to die or have to be someone's slave for the rest of your life? Probably not, right? I mean, you might be afraid that you can't pay your bills this week, or someone might make fun of you, or you might lose your job, or whatever the case may be. Somebody might get in an argument with you. I don't know, whatever our greatest fears are. Somebody might get sick. One person in our family might die. But this was huge. The other thing, all right, let's go ahead and just go to question number 2 here. I don't have the questions on the board. What lessons did you learn from this story? All right, we had all kinds of hands going up. Jason, you can go first.
Well, first, real quick to add on to what you're saying, 9.5 feet tall is kind of a little weird for us. Mostly when we think of tall people, we think of tall, skinny people. This was a massive individual.
Absolutely.
You think of Shaquille O'Neal, but 2 feet taller, and just massive. Anyways, the lesson I learned, I'm going to relate to something Phil Story used to talk about in terms of prayer. He says, oftentimes what we do when we go into prayer, we take our burdens, we kneel down before the Lord, we pray for him to take our burdens, and then we get up, grab our burden, and walk away. And I think in a similar vein, when we have challenges in our life, we sometimes separate God from our challenge. In other words, we'll talk to God in prayer, but then it's like we're leaving him behind when we go out to face that challenge. That was not what David was doing.
Absolutely.
David absolutely knew that if he asked God, that God was going to walk with him to battle Goliath. And I think we need to remember that when we have those challenges in our life, don't just pray to God and then pretend that we're going out to battle on our own, hoping that God answers our prayers. The answer to our prayer is that God is going to go with us to face that challenge.
Absolutely. And David's attitude here is not only is God going to go with me, and it's not like I'm doing this so everybody will think I'm great. He says, I want everyone to know who God is through this. And so sometimes we have to make sure that what we're doing is for the right motivation, so that God is honored and glorified through this. It's not me that's doing this, it's God. All right, who's next?
I kind of said the same thing Jason said. I just said it simpler. You can't count the little guy out with God's help, with God by your side. You can't count yourself out.
Yeah. When I heard it expressed something like, with God, a little boy with a little rock is more powerful than a giant. And it's just the way it is. With God's help, there's no one's bigger than you with God's help. No one can defeat you if you have God's help. It's hard. I mean, I don't know how many soldiers were there, but only one had the guts to go. And I find that that's probably true of most groups, that there's a lot of people willing to sit and not do much and not fight, but oftentimes it just takes one person with the courage to do the right thing and show God's power that will get the other people all riled up. You know, and we're all, remember, these are real people with real personalities making decisions in real time that have real consequences. And so personality might enter into this. Not everybody's as bold as David, but somebody should have done this with God's help. Anna?
It doesn't matter is this working? Okay. It doesn't matter your stature, your age, your knowledge, but it does matter faith in God.
Yeah. Faith is huge. God can do so much with not much as long as there's a little faith involved. So you don't have to be the strongest, the most powerful, the most knowledgeable person, the most intelligent person. As a matter of fact, what has God always done throughout history? I know this is sort of insulting to us. God has always chosen people of little account to do great things. Not the smart or the wise or the powerful of this world or the people that he chooses. Because then people can claim victory on their own. I mean, what if David were 9 feet 9 inches? Who's going to get all the glory for this battle? Probably David. The fact that David was so outmanned here, it says there's no way that was David. There's absolutely no way that was David. That was God. All right, anything else? Joe has one up here. Lessons you learn from the story of David and Goliath.
Well, in some sense, he was already prepared. He used what he needed. I mean, they tried to put on the armor and all this stuff, and that didn't work. And he had already used a slingshot, and we don't have the whole story, but he used what he was already equipped with. And if we equip ourselves with the Bible, we don't need any more. And I think another thing is he was committed. When he slung that rock, it wasn't timidly or, well, I hope or I think or I'm not going to put all my strength into it, because it buried the rock into his, as I said, into his head or face or someplace. He fully committed when he went to do that. And so when we fully commit, you know, and we have the confidence and the faith that God is behind us, we can't lose. It doesn't matter how it turns out. We've not lost. And so just to commit like that, I mean, to really sling that rock as hard as he could, he knew God was behind him, is amazing.
Good. Yeah, two things that you mentioned there. One is David took what he knew. Right? He wasn't trying to invent something else, wasn't trying to be someone else, wasn't trying to be Saul. Took the armor off, took a slingshot out with him. And then he was committed to God and committed to this. You don't go taking that step towards the giant unless you're committed to have this fight and to do this. And that goes a long way. And we know it in life. If we're half committed to something, what are our chances of success? Very little. If we half trust in God, what's our chances of success? Very little. We have to be totally committed to him and knowing what he wants us to do. What about the characters? This is question number 3. What do we learn from the characters in the story? Remember, these are real people with real personalities making real decisions in real time that have real consequences. All right, Jason?
I think David teaches two things, and they're both of his character. One, he sought to encourage his brothers and sisters. He sought to encourage them because he could see they were defeated already. Mm-hmm. And so he sought to encourage them by reminding them who their God was. And then he took that one step further, and he acted on his own encouragement. He said, you guys, God is with us. We are going to win this. We can take him. And he proved it to him by going out there and taking Goliath.
Okay. Yeah, very good. What else? Joe has one. Here's let me just add this little time out here. When we do this, when we go through these stories for the rest of this quarter, I want you to not only focus on the hero of the story, focus on some of these other guys. Because you can learn so much from these other people in the story that most of us tend to overlook. And so we got to make sure that we're focusing on some of these other people. Joe?
So then I'm gonna mess up then, because I'm gonna go to David. If I recall the chapter 17, David says nothing about Goliath's height. Nothing, absolutely nothing that I recall. I mean, I could be wrong, but he doesn't go, oh, I understand why you guys are afraid. That's a big guy. He's battle tested. You know, he's looking at how big God is.
Yeah.
And so I think that's huge. Yeah. Don't look at the adversity. Look at who's supporting us. Who's going to help us get over this issue or problem or whatever.
I've tried to get people to look at this in this way. If you're just looking at Goliath compared to yourself, you have no hope. But if you're looking at Goliath compared to God, and the way I've tried to get people to visualize this, maybe like there's this little bitty army man like this, and then God's like this. All right, so to to God, Goliath is just boink, he's a drop. Nations are a drop in the bucket. What's this Goliath? And that's how David is perceiving this. This guy, he doesn't mention how he's big. It was obvious. He's huge. He's bigger than me, stronger than me. He's been in more battles than I am. But that doesn't matter. I'm not looking at that. I'm looking at the God behind him. And so the way I started visioning this, looking at Goliath, but then sort of look up at the God behind Goliath, and it just changes your perspective. In other words, Goliath is just an ant God's going to step on. That's all he is. And David was the only one who can see that. Larry?
Yeah, when David first shows up on the scene, one of the things that I think speaks to his character is he asked a question, what will be done for the man that gets rid of this Goliath? And they told him this, and, his family would be exempt from taxes. If I was David, I would have done it for the tax exemption, myself. But what it teaches me is that there's nothing wrong when we're doing the Lord's work to look for the reward, but not because it's owed, but because it's promised. It was in David's character. He was thinking, what will become of me? What will be my reward in this battle?
Yeah, very good. Hey, while you turn, I'm going to get to Roy in just a second. Just to let you know how important this is, I showed you in verse 11, it says upset and afraid. But in mine, at the end of verse 24, highlight this. And we're very afraid. In verse 28, Eliab, he became very angry with David. In verse 32, don't let anyone be discouraged. So those are all emotion-type feelings that these are real people. They have these real discouragement, real scared, real timid moments. Rory.
Well, yeah, I was just going to comment about the fact that if you look at Saul and they go through this for 40 days and no one steps up. So it really is, very, very easy for us to not have courage. There were so many
That's
of them.
That's the default position, I think.
Yeah, there were so many of them that just continue to go through this. Saul himself, right? And no one would step up and deal with the issue.
Yeah, Saul should have been the guy. Let's face it. He's the king, and he's bigger than everybody else. He's their champion. He's bigger than everybody else. All right, Jared?
Yeah, I really like David's confidence. It just shows that David had the correct perspective from the beginning. And he was really confounded, like, why haven't you already dispatched this guy? Like, who's this guy? He's going against God's people. And then when, they explain and he sees how scared they are, he just says, don't worry about this. I'll take care of him. But it always strikes me when I read this story about how when he comes upon this scenario and he kind of has the attitude like, why haven't you guys already dispatched this guy?
He's frustrated with them for not having the courage.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Bonnie?
Well, I was looking at the brothers. Obviously, they're scared. And so how they do that is they ridicule and get mad at him because he's out here saying, what is the matter with you guys? We need to go out with the Lord. And then, of course, all of the men were afraid of Goliath. And so.
But his brothers specifically, because what did his brothers just witness in chapter 16? He was anointed by Samuel. And I don't know, the text says that God told Samuel that David was a man after his own heart. It says he anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And there's some indication that men in the city could have been present. Men in the city were at the sacrifice. And Jesse's family was at the sacrifice. It specifically says he anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And when he was anointed, the two things that stood out, there was no pride in David. And what does his brother accuse him of? You're just too proud. That was a direct contrast to Saul. Saul was too proud. David was not too proud. So that was not true. And then he attacks David's heart. I know the insolence of your heart. What has God already said about David's heart? He has a heart after God's heart. So it's not only these accusations are made, but they're totally opposite. It's this projection. They're projecting their own evil heart onto their brother. Then he had no evilness in his heart. All right, we'll pick up there on Wednesday.